You saw the title of this video and immediately the theme for The Sopranos entered your head. Don't lie. Don't lie. I can tell. I know this happened to you. Here we go. People born into a criminal family. How and when did you realize something wasn't quite right? Story 1. Things were always a bit off. I noticed that my family stood out a lot in comparison to other families. I can't remember the moment when I knew, though. I remember being a kid and thinking that my dad was really cool and brave for making it through prison. He was my hero, and I looked up to him a lot. Sometimes, when I was a small kid, he had this huge court case and was about to be locked away again, but he wasn't convicted. Throughout the years, he would brag about how he fooled them all. I was also impressed by him. As an adult, I've looked back at this and thought, I almost lost my father that day and I didn't even realize. When I was 12 or 13, I started getting more suspicious, I suppose. What did he do for a living? I lost my parents at 15, and for the first year after that, I was all about glorifying them. I still haven't wrapped my head around all of it. A year ago, I found my dad's fake passport. It must have been expensive, I'm guessing $5,000 to make, and he must have used it for something important, but I don't know what. Those are some valid emotions. I can understand the confusion this person had about his family and his dad. But there's a question that I think all of us want answered. What did he do? What kind of activities was he involved in? What kind of things happened that required the $5,000 fake passport? Story 2. I should have noticed something when my father would give me my college money each semester in cash, or when the bank teller would ask me why my 20s were from 10 years ago. I just thought my parents didn't like banks. I wasn't allowed to have a toll pass, credit card, or much of anything trackable and just chalked it up to paranoid parents. Fast forward years later, I'm babysitting my 8-year-old sister when my parents were out of the state and someone's pounding at the door at about 4 a.m. I grab a knife and answer, with my then fiancé. Undercover cops in civilian clothes were at the door and refused to let me hold their badge to make sure they're legit. My fiancé does not let them in as they have no warrant, and I explain how there is a young child in the house and my parents are out of state. They were very pushy to get inside, and I didn't see the harm in it, but my very smart husband-to-be did not budge, and I'm glad he didn't, because they would have torn up the house like they did to my dad's business partner and probably scarred my younger sister for life. I called my dad, and although he didn't say what was going on, I could just hear the "oh" in his voice. They were afraid of him running since he was close to the Mexican border, but my dad returned home to be arrested and spent a few years in Club Fed. Apparently, he grew a lot of herb, but because he was not resistant and pled guilty, it was not nearly as bad as it could have been. However, herb equals terrorism, and so we couldn't even hug him goodbye as he was sentenced and other random rules. We're still paying for it. Much money, plus he's not allowed to vote, which crushed him more than anything. This must have been a while ago. By this time, legalization has already taken place in many cities. Legalization and decriminalization. I have a feeling a lot of what this person did could probably be overturned now. Story 3. I am 30 now, and I still have realizations of things in my life that weren't normal and more reflective of criminal behavior. The whole reason I'm compelled to answer is because it makes me reflect, and I just might discover something new about my perspective on life. I like the smell of marijuana because the smell reminds me of being a child. My parents' plants grew in one side of the basement room that my brother and I shared, which was also shared with a 17-foot, 6-meter python. I don't think that smoking herb or growing it is bad, but at the time it was illegal. But it's just poor parenting to grow it in your child's room. I grew up watching my parents do C-substance, get blackout drunk, and beat the hell out of each other. One of my memories is my parents being arrested and my grandfather coming to take care of us because that night both parents went to jail. While parents separating is sadly common, my parents had to put their own twist on it. First, my dad up and moved us in the middle of the night. with nothing more than our pajamas. My mom eventually got visitation ordered through the courts, but one summer decided she would just take off with us. Child Protective Services found us in Oregon 7 months later. Police came to our school and took us out of class. They put 7-year-old me and my 6-year-old brother in the back of a police car and drove us back to Seattle. Somewhere in the middle of the drive, we got handcuffed. We kept hitting the divider and screaming. So for the rest of the drive, we kicked it the rest of the way. We didn't know where we were being taken, and they wouldn't let me call my mom. About a year after being back with our dad, he taught me how to sign his checks so I could get the rent out on time. It wasn't until about age 15 that my dad took back control of his checkbook. Somehow, that was the age I was supposed to start stealing or something, according to his girlfriend at the time. It never occurred to me to steal. It was just my job to make sure everything would get paid on time. My dad would bring home random women. Found out many years later that many of them were adult entertainers. When I took environmental law in college, it occurred to me that I know a few very contaminated sites that I watched the cement poured onto because ecology/EPA was coming out to inspect and sample, etc. That my friends and I getting free gas from the wrecking yard was not an act of charity, but that they were illegally storing it. While I worked on my environmental science degree, my dad accumulated over 600 violations of the Clean Water Act and was identified as a point source polluter of a Superfund site. There's a lot more, but I feel I'm rambling. I covered substances, child abuse, kidnapping, forgery, and quite a bit of disregard for environmental regulations. This one I thought was going to be the same as the last one, and I thought, why would they be under arrest for something simple like herb growing? But then things just kept escalating. Abusing other substances? Abuse? Environmental law? Do you think this kid would have studied something else if their parents were legit? Do you think because of his degree he might be involved in the family business? Story 4. About 8 years old. ATF agents kicked in the door of my house, put me, my mother, and my grandmother face down on the floor, and then went into her bedroom, threw everything out of her closet, busted a hole in the wall of the back of her closet, removed something, and then left. I have no idea, but my grandmother was into something. Seriously, no idea if those guys were even really ATF or not, but there was something there. They took it, and nothing more was ever said about it. Also, back when you used to have to pay for long distance, there were multiple calls to Germany on the phone bill every month. Asking about them would be met with, "That's grown-up business, child. Don't stick your nose in unless you want it chopped off." Every other Saturday, a man would come over and give me eclairs, and then he and my grandmother would go to the kitchen and talk. On several occasions, he would come with gifts for me, but I was never allowed to actually have them. Usually, it was a doll or stuffed animal of some sort, and even though they were supposedly mine, my grandmother would take them into her room, take the stuffing out, and put new stuffing in before giving them to me. Questions about the eclair man or the toys were also adult business. To this day, I don't know what the hell is going on. Story 5. My dad got out of his family in a pretty big way, but it still comes around in odd ways. The first inkling that I can remember being aware of that it wasn't all old history was when 13 members of his family dropped down in rapid succession. The next was the reveal that someone didn't just steal his car, but a week later delivered the stripped frame to his home. They didn't steal it from his home. The next was when I learned there are 3 different birth certificates issued for me from the hospital at the time of my birth. One was used for court reasons, another was deliberately falsified at our behest, and the third is the one considered my true birth certificate. The next was when I moved somewhere my dad wasn't too pleased I was moving to. I noticed some odd reactions to my last name around those parts. The distinct feeling of being unwelcome in a relatively large city like that gets you. I discovered my name causes certain issues when trying to enter Canada. I can, it just takes more time than it ought to. The most recent reveal was the existence of false birth certificates, social security numbers, passports, etc. for myself and my parents. They haven't been used, but they exist, just in case. My brother and sister do not have complimentary false docs since they're from my mom's prior marriage. My dad has given little resistance to the idea of me changing my last name when it's been mentioned over the years. It's also something I learned a fair number of family members have done already. I think there's a conflict for him, being he and I are the last two of 3 males with the name alive, so he doesn't outwardly endorse the idea since I'm the youngest and only one likely to have children. If I change my name, the family name dies with me. Well, our family. There's one other family in the U.S. with the same last name. We've never looked into any relationship.
Please like and subscribe if you made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day.
Story 6. My father, whom I see about every 2 to 3 years, used to visit and would bring about 5 or 6 green things in huge plastic-wrapped squares. I was about 10 when he offered me $100 to help him clear out a warehouse with hundreds of empty plant pots filled with dirt. The warehouse also had foil-covered rooms. Then he started bringing in massive white bricks from his truck when he stayed the night. Overheard a family friend talk about him breaking someone's legs with a baseball bat because they owed him money, but was too scared to go to the police. He stopped everything when he got busted and nearly went to prison until his girlfriend at the time took the fall for whatever he was nearly charged with. Now he's worth millions and owns a massive company solely funded on the substances he used to sell. Too long didn't read? Father used to sell bricks of sea substance and herb, is now worth millions solely from doing so. Yeah, I know Sopranos is not the best and truest subject to get your information of about what's happening in the world. But isn't it difficult to get out of a family? Especially in that business? Isn't it one of those if you're in it for life kind of deals? In a way, it's good that he's in some kind of legitimate business. Well, we can only assume he's legitimate. I wonder what kind of business he's doing now. Story 7. I wasn't born into it per se. It was later in my life when I was about 12, but I'll give it a shot. You know something is up, but it's mostly assumed that your family is loosely affiliated with the real criminals. They're moneymen, accountants, lawyers, etc. I probably knew something was up when my friend said he loved my mom's new Jag, and I replied, "Thanks." One of my stepdad's clients couldn't pay his bill, so he just gave us his car. And my friend replied, "Dude, I don't think that's how it works." Also, occasionally seeing people whose names you recognize that you've met appear in the newspaper is a dead giveaway as well. Story 8. I don't know if I belong in this thread, but growing up I was told my dad was a construction worker. That's why he's gone at night. He always counted a lot of money, like several piles of hundreds. Once, my dad gave me and my siblings like $500 each. I used to sit in my room for hours because my dad had friends over. Sometimes we got to get pizza when he had friends over. I think I realized something was up when I learned what herb was and how much there was in my house. Several gym bags worth at least. Now that I think about it, there was a lot that should have tipped me off, like how I was never allowed to answer the door, the expensive gifts, the fights with people I didn't know. His arrest confirmed my suspicions, though. Story 9. Nothing big, but my father was a substance dealer before we moved. It was an extreme shock to me because he was a highly respected businessman, had a great 6-figure job, and had authority in the workplace. I was 13 maybe, freshman in high school, just snooping around the attic for no good reason before I left the house to hang out with some friends. I stumbled across this kind of hidden door, so I opened it. There were pounds and pounds of marijuana and sea substance. I asked my father about it, thinking it was there before we moved in or something. He just said, with a stupid grin on his face, "Yep, I sell that stuff, son." My jaw hit the floor. Worst dad joke ever. No, seriously, I'm surprised he was that forthright with the kid. And the story said before we moved. Does that mean when he moved he went legit? Did he have enough money from his sales to be able to quit like that? Story 10. When I was about 13 or 14 and a group of my uncles pulled me aside and told me that if I went on any dates with boys and the boys weren't nice to me, they would have them looked after. I thought it was a joke and laughingly mentioned it to my parents. My parents just went white and looked at each other, and I didn't see the uncles much after that. Story 11. My great-gramps changed his last name to the one I have now due to an unaliving he committed way back. All his sons were the scariest old men I've ever been around. My mom has told me some vague stories about how they used to deal with people. Luckily, my pops decided to play it straight, but he had his psycho moments too. Well, his own dad sent him to high school with a monkey wrench to deal with a particular bully. Destroyed this kid's face, I guess. To this day, there are folks in my town who call my dad Wrench. Story 12. Born into a gang-affiliated family. All my aunts and uncles have the 3 dots tat on their wrist bones, and I knew something was off when I asked what it meant and got awkward looks back. Also scary was when I was 3, my mom was watching America's Most Wanted and saw my uncle on the show. Hey, look, Uncle's on TV. What? Let me see. Oh. He probably wasn't compensated for his likeness, was he? Did he just see his uncle's face, or did they do a reenactment of what he was supposed to be under suspicion of? Story 13. When I was a young child, my brother William got convicted with unaliving. The police, while looking for him, woke our family up in the middle of the night, kicking our door in and dragging him out. My mother woke me up ticked off because they broke our door. Not that he wouldn't be coming back for about 20 years, but that our door was now broken. I remember thinking that night of how much my family was actually into if this could happen without batting an eye. Story 14. My dad took off when I was 4, met him again at 15, moved in with him. Turns out he was a massive substance lord using the guise of a computer repair business. Huge mob ties. Had one of my exes tied up in his trunk after he punched me. Great family man. Terrible human being. Story 15. When I was little, my parents grew tomatoes. We had several long green houses full of tomato plants behind our house. It wasn't until a few years ago I was talking to my sister and she asked me if I could remember ever eating or seeing a tomato come from those plants. Oh.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.